Hello makers, so we're going to write code for our Circuit Playground Express to create a fashion item that also doubles as a signaling device. Now by doing this we're also going to learn how to write code that responds to button presses, and we'll learn about setting a variable to indicate if something is true or false, which we'll use to tell the Circuit Playground Express to play an animation circle of lights, and to do it also so that it shows an alert or if it shows everything is cool. Now, the Circuit Playground Express is small, and many people actually wear this as a jewelry item. And Adafruit sells strong magnets that you can glue to the back to attach the CPX to your clothes. Here's a 3D printed case that you can use as a necklace, and you can hang something over it like a seashell or something else translucent to have it diffuse the light behind it from the CPX. There are even plans online to build a Tony Stark-like arc reactor that you can wear. So in our scenario, we're going to write code that shows a rainbow animation if everything is okay. But if you're at a party and all of a sudden you need your wingman or your wingwoman to drop in and save you from awkward conversations or other creepiness, you can simply click and have the red button showing. And again, it looks like a nice little animation is happening, but your friends know if there's red, I'm in dread, so come ahead and rescue me from the peril. So again, on and off, but we're going to have a rainbow effect or please help me out. That's where we're headed. So let's get into it. I'm here in my browser now at makecode.adafruit.com, which is where we needed to go in order to be able to code for our Circuit Playground Express. I'm going to click on the New Project button on the left-hand side here, and then I get lots of options up here with the different drawers that we have. Now we're eventually going to use this forever loop here, which essentially runs any code inside of it forever. But for starters here, we don't want to run things forever. We just want to start an animation when the user clicks on button A. Now, where do we find that? Well, you could just go ahead and click on all the drawers, and remember that you're going to see different things if you click on the drawers. And actually, in this input area, you see that there is this block here that says on button A, click. But if for some reason you wanted to say, hey, I wonder if there is a statement or where that statement is, if you go up into the search field here and you just type in a word that hopefully will show up in the statement that you're thinking about. If I type in button, which statements have buttons associated with them? And remember, all of these different statements here are color-coded. So in the magenta area here, we've got this button statement here. We've got also on button A, click. So lots of different things for us to take a look at. Now, even though we see the word button in a bunch of these different statements here, what it actually does is it finds anything that's got any of the letters in button in there, even if they're not in the button order. So that's why we see some things that don't have button in them in there as well. Now, we see that we just have button A show up, but if we click and drag this over, and that's exactly what we want to do, notice that this has a drop-down menu where it says button A, and in there we see we can also set this so that it will respond to events for button B being pressed, a press of both A and B at the same time, and a bunch of things that say A1 through A7. If you look at the Circuit Playground Express, you've got these circles that say A1 through A7, and the ones that are labeled with this A number combination support what's called capacitive touch. Now what that means is if you touch them, they can respond like buttons. If you connect wires or other conductive material to them, they can also act as buttons. And anything that can carry electricity can flow through that touch mechanism. So if you've ever visited me in my office, you'll see that I've got a little statue of Baby Groot with a real-life plant growing out of it. Now, plant material is actually conductive. So if you touch any of Baby Groot's leaves, that touch is conducted through the leaves. One of these leaves is attached to an alligator clip, which goes into one of the pins in the Circuit Playground Express. And I've written a little code in CircuitPython in here so that Baby Groot can speak. Now back to our code, we do want button A as what's going to fire in this particular block that we're setting up here. And notice also that we can change the event that happens. So this says click, which means you've pressed and let go of the button. But you can also do a long click, so if you hold it for a little while before you let go, or you can have certain events happen if your finger is pressing down on the button, or when you release the button and it goes up. So lots of different things that we can do to make this small device that we've got behave in different ways. What we want to do is we want to get an alert to start showing up, and for the alert we're just going to grab an animation from the light drawer. So if you click on light, we're going to ignore NeoPixel for now. NeoPixel has some code that we can use if you hook up an external light strip to your NeoPixel or to your Circuit Playground Express. My students are going to be doing that in some class projects, but for now we're just concentrating on the lights that are on the Circuit Playground Express. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab this show animation here, drag it over, and we're going to plop it down. Notice how it fits nicely inside of this coding block for the on button A click. I'm going to let go. I get that satisfying little pop, and I can select any animation that I want from the built-in set of 6 animations. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select, we're going to work with the alert first. We're going to select Theater Chase. This is sort of a nice animation. It doesn't look too much like a police animation. It sort of swirls around, but it's all red or red-ish, so that's probably a good one for our signal to say, hey, come on in and rescue me. In terms of how long this animation is going to happen, if we click down here where it says 500, notice it says ms afterward. That means milliseconds, meaning thousandths of a second. So this is half a second. 1 second is 1,000. We'll do the largest choice that we have here, which is 2,000 milliseconds or 2 seconds. And if we click on this, let's see what happens. So I've clicked on button A in my simulator here. Notice it animates for 2 seconds and it stops. And it actually doesn't clear out the ring that we've got here. So our 10 neopixels, it looks like the ones that are highlighted here are the very last ones that animated in the last frame when 2 seconds were up. If we click it again, we might see a different mix of items that's just sort of frozen there. Now we actually know how to clear out any animation which might be lingering here. We could simply click on light, we could drag over a show ring, and if I click on the gray button in the middle and then click on all of my colors here, what that's going to do is after the 2 seconds are up, it's going to turn off all of the colors of all of the lights, regardless of whether they're on or they're off. So we see this is working now. But there's even another way for us to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get rid of this show ring here. I could either click on it and then once I've clicked on it, press the delete key, or I could click on it and drag it over into my drawers and notice the drawer here shows like that it's a trash can. I let go and I've thrown it away. Now under light, if you want to clear out all of the lights that might be animating, I can just grab this thing that says clear at the bottom, let it go, gives me that satisfying pop. And now if I go ahead and I try out my code here, I click on A, it animates for 2 seconds and then it clears it. So again, different ways to do things in Circuit Playground Express. So we're starting to get what we want here. But when somebody clicks on the button A, what we want is the animation to start, and then we want that to continue essentially forever until this button has been clicked again, and then we want to turn it off. So essentially what we're doing is we want to keep track of something which is on or off, or really there's a way to set this up in computing where we're looking to see if something is true or false. So what we'll do is we'll create a variable. It's going to act like a little box. Inside of that variable or that box, we're going to put in some data that says either true, we should be animating, or false, we shouldn't be animating. And what we'll do forever is this will continue to loop around forever and ever and ever and ever. And as long as it says animate is true, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to show this animation. But if it says animate equals false, it can either be true or false, then we won't show the animation. We'll continue to go around though and check and not animate again until we've clicked on button A. So we need to do a few things. One thing that we need to do is we need to create this sort of box to hold our data. That's what a variable is in programming. And a box can't, because it's called a variable, that means we can vary the contents. So we'll initially put a false in there, which means, hey, don't animate until the user has clicked on the button. Then we'll change the contents of that animate box to true. And that will say, okay, in our forever loop, if the animate is true, then what we want to do is we want to run the animation. So that's a lot to say. Let's go ahead and start to construct this though. So very first thing that we need to do is we need to create this box that says, hey, either animate or don't animate. Now those boxes of data are called variables. If we click on where it says variable down here, it says make a variable. If I click on make a variable here, I can give it a name. So I'm going to type in the name animate. So animate is going to be either true or false. So I'm going to say okay here. And essentially what I've just done is I've said, all right, make code, now you know that I've got this box here called animate. Now my code doesn't know that this box exists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say set animate to, and then I'm going to give it a value. So I'm going to click on this guy and I'm going to drag it over. Now, when do I want this to execute? I want it to execute when my code starts up. So I've got this loop here that says execute forever. I've got this loop here that says execute when button A is clicked. But what about, is there something which will go ahead and execute just when things start? So I can go ahead, set up this animate variable, the animate box, and I can put a false in it initially because I don't want the animation to happen until the user's clicked a button. Well, there is a way for us to do that. If we scroll down here and take a look at the different loops, it's kind of a misnomer to call it a loop, but on start says, hey, only execute the code that's inside of this thing that looks like a little C here when your code starts for the very first time. So I'm going to grab on start, put it in here. Once my code starts, it says set animate, and it says set it to 0. Now, I actually don't want to set it to 0. I want to set it to either true or false. Now, you might be saying, well, can't we just go ahead and say, if it's 0, go ahead and animate, and then can we change it to 1 or another number and stop animating? You could certainly do that, but it's better practice to have it be just true or false, because then you don't have to worry about it being a number that's outside of the ranges that you're evaluating for. So since we only want it to animate or not animate, we're going to put in here, for starters, we're going to put in a false. Now, where do we find the false? Well, the false is actually in this thing called logic. So if we click on logic, we're going to learn a little bit about how we can evaluate different conditions. But if you scroll down here, you see how it says true and false? You can grab this guy that says false here, this sort of long hexagon. It looks like it's not going to fit into this one because it's it's curved here, the 0. But if we drop the false in, it does in fact fit there. And even though we could have clicked a true or a false and dragged it over, if you click on the pull down menu here, you can change false to true or true to false. So what this is going to do right from the start is it's going to set up the animate to false, which essentially says don't animate. Now, how are we going to use this? Well, inside of the forever loop, what we're going to do is we're going to check to see, hey, is animate equal to true? And if it is, then we want to do the animation. So let's see how we're going to do that. We're going to go back into logic again, and logic is where we evaluate these things that are true or false. So I'm going to grab this first one here that says if true, then. So I'm going to click it, drag it, and I'm going to put it inside of my forever loop here and let go. And I'm just going to give myself a little bit more room. You can do this and make code drag stuff to the left or up or down or whatever. And so it says if true, then. Well, actually, this is not what I want to evaluate here. I don't want to say if true. I want to say if animate equals true. So I can actually change the condition that's inside of here, again, inside of logic, and I can put in animate equals true. So if I click on logic, and you see how I have these different hexagons that are in here. Now, these zeros are just placeholders here. So if I click on this guy, drag it over, and if I plop it in where it says if true, what I want to do is I want to put my animate variable in here to say if animate equals true, and then I want to animate. So where do I get my animate variable from? We created this box up here. It's a variable. So inside of the variables drawer, we now have this variable we created called animate. So I'm going to click on this guy, I'm going to drag it over, I'm going to let it go inside of the first 0. By the way, it's hard sometimes to line things up, and it's possible that you might put it on the outside here. So you can see I just displaced things. If you ever put stuff in the wrong area here, you haven't lined it up perfectly, remember you can always undo. So you can either do a Command Z or Control Z, depending on if you're doing Mac or Windows, or in the lower left-hand corner, or in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that there's this undo button if you hover your cursor over, and that undoes what I do if I give it a couple of clicks here. And so I'm back on if 0 equals 0. But I'm going to go ahead and grab my animate variable, and I'm going to put the animate right over the 0. And you can see how the outline of the 0 changes a little bit to white when I'm right on top of it. That's a good signal. I'm going to let go. But I want my if animate to be true. And in fact, what's interesting here is all of a sudden I get red around this block, and I get a little yield sign with an exclamation point in it. That means there's an error in my code. Now, this might not be very clear to you. It actually says operator equals equals cannot be applied to types Boolean and 0. That doesn't mean a whole lot. It sounds kind of geeky, but really what Boolean values are, they're values that are true or false, and only true or false. So when we set up animate up here and we set it to false, this is saying, hey, this value can only hold either false or true. So if we're trying to say, hey, animate equals 0, it can't be 0. That's kind of like putting a square peg in a round hole. They won't match up. So we need to put either a false or a true in here. How do we do that? The same way we did it up here. We click on logic. We click on we can click either true or false and we can change them. So I'm going to drag true over here because that's actually what I want. Again, it looks like it shouldn't go on top of the 0 because they're two different shapes, but it actually will. You can see when I move my true on top of the 0, I get a white line around the 0, let go. It says if animate equals true. By the way, and notice the error goes away. If I click on true, I could change it to false, but nope, I want it to change for true. And what I want to do here is I want to take my show animate out of this and I want to put it in here. Now, if I click on this and drag it over, it's actually going to drag both items over, so I don't want that. But if I hold down my control key or on my command key on a Mac, I believe it's control key on Windows, and then click, it will just select this first item. It won't drag the whole block over. I'm going to plop that in here, and this essentially says if animate equals true, go ahead and animate over and over and over again. So it'll do it for 2 seconds, but then it'll check again. It'll do it for 2 seconds, check again, do it for 2 seconds, check again, do it for 2 seconds. And we're not clearing the animation here too, so it'll just continue to start where it left off after the first 2 seconds. So this is looking good, but there's one more thing we need to do. On start, we set it to false, animate to false. Forever, we take a look in here and we say, if animate equals true, but if it's false in here, we're never going to animate. So what we want to do is we want to actually change when you click on button A so that animate becomes true. So what we want to do here is essentially take this statement that we've done, which says set animate to false, and we want to put the same thing in here, but we want it to say set animate to true. Now, I could either recreate this, and so, I see, oh, it's, this is found in variables. It's the same color as variables in here, and I can see, yeah, I got my set animate in here. But one of the things that you can also do is, since I want essentially the same statement here down below, but I want to change false to true, I can simply click on this sort of pinkish statement here, right-click on it, and that's 2 fingers on the Mac, and I'm going to say duplicate. I've made a copy of it. The copy is this little gray bit down here. It's gray because I'm not plugged into any of the loops. So gray means this code is not going to execute, but you can hold some code on the side here if you want to. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this right into button A. I'm going to let go, and it says set animate to. Now, if I set animate to false, what I want to do is I want to set it to true. So if I click on true here, now what happens when I click on button A, it's going to animate this. So let's give this a shot. Again, if I stop my code and then press play to start my code, we can just think about everything that we have happening here. So the code just started. It set animate to false, which means it created a box that we call animate, and it's got a false in it. And then it's doing forever this, and it's saying, is animate true, is animate true, is animate true, is animate true. And if it is true, it would show an animation. So that's why it's inside of this if statement here. But if it's never true, it never does what's inside of this light blue if statement. So it never does the show animation stuff. So it keeps saying, is animate true? No, go to the end. Is animate true? No, go to the end. But now, if I click on set button A, look what happens. We look inside of our animate box, which currently is false. We set it to true. I've still got the clear in here, but that shouldn't matter because I'm going to go right over here and then I'm going to say, is animate true? It is, show animation. And it'll continue to show the animation. So I'm going to click on button A. Let's see if this works. And woo, there it animates. And it doesn't just animate for 2 seconds. When it's done for 2 seconds, then it goes around here again because this loop goes forever. Does animate equal true? It does, so do this. 2 seconds later, does animate equal true? It does, so do this. And so we see it's continuing going and going and going, which is awesome. But one thing that we don't do is we don't have any mechanism to shut it off. Because if we click on button A again, well, animate is already equal to true, so we're setting it to true, and we're just saying true, 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 even though we've got this little clear in here, it's not stopping things. So what we need to do is we need to have a condition here which says essentially, if animate is true, set it to false. Otherwise, if it's false, set it to true. Well, how do we do that? We've got up here this statement that we got out of logic, which says, if do this. So if this statement is true, do what's inside. But what we want to do is we want to say, if animate is true, then change it to false. Otherwise, else, change false to true. Now let's take a look at this within logic. If you click on logic, you see how we have if and else in here. So this means if we have a true condition, do this. But if we have a false condition, do what's in the second block of code. True, do the first. Second, false, do the second. So I'm going to click on this guy. I'm going to drag it over. I'm going to plop this inside of my on button A equals, or on button A click. And you can actually drag these guys and move them around here too. So we will do that eventually. But first, let's check the condition that we want to evaluate here. If button A is clicked, then what we want to do is we want to put something in place of true here. We want to take a look and we want to see if animate equals true. And if it is, then we want to set it to false. So essentially we want to take everything that's inside of this really long hexagon here. So we can duplicate that as well. There's no reason why you can't recreate it from scratch in Logic, but since we've already done it, I'm going to click on this whole hexagon. You see it just turns a little bit darker blue there. And once it's selected, I can go ahead and right click on top of it. I can select duplicate. It duplicates it. Again, if for some reason I just dragged the wrong thing and dragged it off there, I'll put it back. If for some reason you make a mistake, remember you've always got your undo button here. So again, you can see I'm clicking in places and I'm just a little bit off here, but I'm going to try to click right on the right gray stuff right to the left of that pointy part of this hexagon here. And I'm going to drag it over and I'm going to put it into the if true. So I'm going to get rid of if true, and now it's going to say if animate equals true. Well, if animate equals true, then I want to set animate to not true, but false. So I want to say stop animating. And not only do I want to stop animate, I want to clear out any of the lights that are here. Now we're going to see a little quirk in the animation in just a bit. But if I check and see if animate equals true, if that's not true, then what I want to do is instead of setting it to false, I want to set it to true. Again, let's think about this just a little bit slower, and you can pause and go back if this is troubling. But we're going to say if the animate box has true inside of it, then we want to put false inside the animate box. But if we check to see if the animate box has true in it and it doesn't have true in it, then what we want to do is we want to put true in it. So the opposite of what we have up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put down in here, set animate to, and instead of false, to true. So either I'm going, if it's true, false, otherwise if it's false, because it can only be true or false, set it to true. So I'm going to click on where I have set here so that I've highlighted this red line of code. I'm just going to duplicate it because I want essentially the same line of code. I'm going to plop it in here, but the one thing I want to change is set animate to, and instead of false, I want to set it to true. And I don't need to worry about the clear in here, but we're actually going to see, the one quirk we'll see is that clear doesn't work. We have to do one additional thing to it. But let's try our code out now. It automatically puts it in the simulator here. So if I click on A, all right, we got our animation, which is good. At this point, again, we started out here, animate, the box animate said false. Then we clicked on our button. So forever was executing, and it keeps saying, what's animate got in it? Does it have true? No. 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 But then when we clicked on button A, we said if animate equals true. Well, it doesn't. So we skip this first part here. So animate doesn't equal true, animate equals false. So what we do is we set animate to true. Next time we go through, because forever continues to go through back here, if animate equals true, it does. Let's animate for 2 seconds and then check again, animate for 2 seconds, animate again, or check again after 2 seconds, animate again for 2 seconds. And that's why we have this constant animation happening. So all this looks good. Now let's click on button A again. And what should happen here is if this is animating, animate is true. It's going to say if animate is true, now that is the case. So what it's going to do is it's going to set animate to false, and it's going to click clear. So the next time we get up here to forever, we get if animate equals true, but it's not. It's false now. Remember, we just put false in the box, so it's not going to execute. So watch what happens when I click on A. It stops animating after the 2 seconds is done, but it hasn't cleared out all of my lights, even though I've got a clear statement in down here. This is one of these quirks of animating on the Circuit Playground Express. Because this executes right here, this on button A clicks, even in between the 2 seconds that are animating, it will actually stop it in a frame and it won't clear out the lights. If that sounds sort of unusual, the one thing that I'll mention here, just remember this is what you've got to do if you want to clear out everything after an animation, is if you go into light and you scroll down here, remember where we got the clear? Well, just above that, there's a stop all animations. So that's the one that we're going to grab here. We're going to first stop the animation. So I'm going to put that right in front of the clear, and then we're going to clear. So now it updates my code here. And if I click on A, we animate. Animate is true. Click on A. If animate is true, it turns it into false. And if it's false, it not only sets it to false, it stops animation and it clears it. So again, the forever loop continues to run, but animate is false now, so there's no animation happening. If I click on A again, it's going to say, hey, is animate true? It's not. So it doesn't execute this first part, it executes the second part here, and it sets animate to true. Once it sets animate to true, we go up here and forever continues to evaluate. Is it true? Yep, it goes ahead. So perfect. You've just set up so that you have, if you click on it, you can turn on or off your alarm. So this is the first little bit of code that we've done. We've learned a lot. We've learned that we can set up things in onStart and they execute only once. We've learned that forever executes things forever, but we can also put a variable in here that can say, hey, do we have a result that we want? And then we can apply whatever we want to do forever and ever and ever. So in our case, we have an animate box or an animate variable, which has either true or false in here. And forever and ever and ever, we're going to check, is it true? Is it true? Is it true? If it's not true, we skip what's in the middle. If it is true, we do what's in the middle. Now also on button A, what we do is we actually check to see what's in that animate box. So if you click on this, it's like a toggle. And if it says true, we set that box to false. So we stop any of the animation that might happen forever. And we also clear out any of the buttons so nothing shows. So this forever is going to continue, but at this point it says false, do not animate. But if we click this button again, it executes the same code. It says is animate true. If that's not correct, if animate in fact equals false, then since this is not true, we skip this first block of code. We go down here because animate doesn't equal true, animate must equal false. We execute set animate to true, which means we go ahead and we start our animation again. Animates false, animates true, animates false, animates true, animates false, animates true. So hopefully that's clear to you. If not, feel free to go through the video again. You can try this out on your own. But before I give you the challenge problem to finish this off, let me go ahead and really emphasize how you save items. And this is definitely an area that confuses students, so you really want to pay attention to this. Now, the first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we save our work to the browser. So this browser on the computer that you're at, when you're logged in as the person that you're logged into, that's going to save a copy of this work as whatever you've named it as down here. So you see where it's named Untitled? I'm going to backspace over Untitled. That's in this little box that's right next to the save button here. And I'm going to type in, let's give this a good name. How about alert shows and stops with a press. So that's a fine name. You can name it whatever you want if you think it's more descriptive. So I've done that. Now look what happens when I click on home. So it saves this, and you can see that it says alert shows and stops with a press. And if I click this again, I get back up into here. Now that means it's saved in the browser, but what you should also do is you should also save it to your computer, maybe to your USB drive so that you've got a backup as well. So I'm going to click on the little save button here, and this is the same as if you click on download. I'm going to save it right to my desktop here. Notice that it accepts the name that I've given it. It also adds a little circuit playground into the beginning of it. So I select save, and this is going to save the UTF file right to the desktop. So now I've got a backup onto my desktop. If I go over and take a look at my desktop, I can see, yep, this is the file that I just saved. They're called UTF files. By the way, this is the same file that you can drag over onto your Circuit Playground Express. If you plug it in and then click the reset button, everything turns in green. So, that's what we've done. We've got our copy here. One more thing that we want to do. So what about the scenario if we want to take this code, we want to keep this code so that it won't change it, but we want to work on a copy almost as if we did a save as. So this is what we're going to do now, is we're going to keep this code the same, but if I click over on home, and then I could go to new project, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, by the way, I'll show you too. If you go into new project, let's say, and you say, oh, I don't want this. How do I get out of this? Under the little gear icon up here, there's something that says delete project. So I've got nothing in here, so I can just go ahead and select delete. I'm going to delete it. But if I want to go ahead and I want to use what I just saved to my disk, but in a new project, what I can do is I can say, all right, let's go ahead and import. So if I click on import here, I can either import from a URL. So if you happen to see somebody else's code online, or if you've saved your code online and you've got a URL for it, you can go ahead and pull that up. But what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and import the file that we just saved to the desktop. If we click on Choose File, again, this is sort of like pulling up an old file in Word, or whatever application you're using. So I'm going to click on this guy here. This is the file that we just saved. I'm going to say Open. Then, since I've got this in my Choose file, I'm going to say go ahead and open this file. And this is the code that I've got. Now, I'm going to do a couple of things here. One is I'm going to give this a new name because it's got my old name down here. So I'm going to highlight everything in here, and I'm going to just say, how about, hopefully when I'm done here, this is going to be the working alert brooch. And I'm going to press enter here. So I've just saved it. Now, I want to make sure that this is different than what I had before. So I'm just going to grab anything and just drag it over here. So if I click on light, if I click on set all pixels to red, I'm not even going to put this in here. I'm just going to put it to the side. It's not going to execute, but I want to really see, hey, is working alert brooch different from the previous code that I saved? So if I go to home, here's working alert brooch. If I click on that again, I can see I've got this little set all pixels in here. But if I click on home, if I click on alert shows and stops with a press, I should have the same code, but not that set all pixels to red. So now I've got two different files which essentially have the same code in them, except for that little bit that I've added over there. That's exactly what I want. I click back over on home here, and what it always does is it takes the latest version that's modified and puts it just to the right of your new project here. But I'm going to go back into working alert brooch, and this is where I want you to create your final project. Now, let's see what this is supposed to look like when it's working. I demonstrated this in the beginning of the video, and if you click on the A button, this is what we have working right now. So the alert starts, click it again, the alert stops. The alert starts, the alert stops. Button B is going to behave the exact same way, but it's going to show a different animation. We're going to choose the rainbow animation as kind of our safety code for our wingman, or wingwoman. So if we click on this button, we see rainbow showing up here, and I can turn it off. Rainbow's on, rainbow's off. But if I click on, again, button A instead of button B, I get this red alert here. By the way, I can also shut it off with button B. I can also turn it on with button A. So off here, on here. These essentially just act as toggles, but if I do the on position, if it's either in button A or in button B, when I click from off to on, or from false animate to true animate, I'm going to get rainbow if I set true here. Or if I set true here, I'm going to get my alert. A is alert, B is rainbow. So how do you do that? You actually know how to do that already. You are going to set up a on button B click, which is just the same as on button A click. Now, the one thing that we want to do is when we go through and we decide, hey, animate is true, we want to see, hey, do we want to show the alert animation, which is this one? Or if we don't, then we want to show the rainbow animation. So that implies a couple of things. It implies inside this if conditional, if we're doing an animate, we want to check to see, hey, if we have another condition, so we're going to create another variable in here, and you can say maybe alert animation is what you want to call it. If alert animation is true, then we want to show this one. But if it's false, if we've got that if else condition in here, then we want to show the rainbow animation. Now that also implies not only are we going to set up this alert animation true false, and you could have called it anything that you want, but alert animation box in here, why don't you call it alert animation? Because this way, you can check your work against this. We're going to have to set alert animation true if you click on button A, and we're going to have to set alert animation equals false if you're on button B. So you should know what to do. Give that a try, and I'll show you the solution video at some point in the future.